Hey everybody, welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and oh boy, here we go. We are talking about a film that I have been saying now for months since I saw it. I don't know, in May or June, whenever it came out in theaters wide release. I've been calling it the best film of the year, and I stand by the fact that we could have some films sometimes that we call like our favorites of the year. And right now, for me, my favorite film of the year is Challengers. It's the one I most enjoy, the one I think about the most in terms of enjoyment. But when I think of the best film, and best, it's so hard to be objective versus subjective when we talk about best versus favorite versus top films of the year, top tens, all that stuff. But when we think of the best films, and I think about like the Sight and Sound list in particular, curating the best films that cinema has to offer. And when I think of that term, I think about what films are going to be the ones that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40, 50 years from now, we are looking at as the defining touchstone of a very specific experience, a specific culture, a very specific time period, a very specific genre. And I think of a lot of recent films, for example, like Parasite, being this huge breakout for international cinema, being the first international film to win an Oscar, but having all these multiple genres and tones going on. There's a reason that made the Sight and Sound list. I think of Get Out, which is very defining, not just for horror, but for, satirical horror and the way it uses themes of race in a way it kind of tells this really thoughtful, provoking, but also very horrific tale about race and white privilege and all that stuff. And then I think of movies like Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which is just more of your classic drama, but doing so in such a masterful way that it has become a staple of queer cinema. Those three films all made the Sight and Sound list only years after they were released. The Sight and Sound list of the top 100 films of all time. And so when I think of films that can qualify as the best films of a specific year, a specific time, a specific genre, it really has to make that mark. And that's why I think I Saw the TV Glow is going to be hopefully respected as one of the most quintessential horror films for the queer experience, particularly the transgender experience, but also just the idea of being different and identity. This is going to be one of those staple horror films that I hope and I think is going to really endure the test of time. It's a film that I have not been able to break from my own mind. And minutes after leaving the theater, I said, I love this. I need to talk about this. And then things got busy and I never got the chance to talk about this. Now we're doing these summer catch up reviews. And I'm like, perfect. I need to talk about I Saw the TV Glow. And in the time since I saw it till now, I've thought about it so much that I've kind of grown even more in appreciation of it, to where if I'd done this review when I first saw it, I would have given it a glowing, for lack of a better term, review. And I would have heralded it as one of the best films of the year. But the more I've thought about it and the more I've sat with it, and the more I've like contemplated what it has to say, not just about our relationship to media and to screens and to television and art in general, but also what it means for the queer experience, which we'll talk about in a sec. I think I've come around to thinking that this is one of the defining films of this era. And I know it might be hyperbolized now, maybe a year from now, people aren't talking about it. But I do think also the fact that it is so polarizing. I mean, look at some of the best horror films of all time. Look at The Shining. Very polarizing. People hated it. It was nominated for Razzies, and now it's pretty much widely accepted as one of the top 10 horror films ever made by a lot of people. So I think this is one of those films I hope kind of just endures that legacy. If you haven't seen it, please go see it. And again, it is very divisive, and I want to say that right now out the gate. Not everyone is going to love it. Not everyone's even going to pick up on all its very under the radar messaging, even though I think when you look at it looking for that, it's very obvious. But I think if you could just kind of go into it as just like, I'm watching another just regular horror film, I don't necessarily know if you're going to pick up on all the nuances. But that's what's beautiful about cinema, is that it's not a one and done thing. You can revisit it as many times as you really want. So I think the best thing about this is that, like, yeah, you might not be able to get all that on the first viewing, but with every subsequent watch, you can go deeper and deeper into this kind of manic state that this film leaves you in, and leaves you with all these things to chew on. It's like when you eat a barbecue dinner and you are about to throw out the bones of your ribs and you're like, there's still some meat on there that I could chew off. And I think that's kind of what this film is. You think you had it all, and then you're like, wait, there's still so much there for me. And that's kind of a similar experience I had with Get Out, a film that I really appreciated. I understood the racial messaging, but the more I watch it over and over again, I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Like I'm finding different little things and little pockets to rediscover and find enjoyment in. So I rewatched this last night, actually, right after midnight. It was perfect. I turned the lights off. I put this on a little TV in my room. I kind of have a little small TV that I don't really like to watch movies for the first time on because I want to have that more cinematic grand experience. But I figured I've seen this film before. Let's watch it on like a little bit of a smaller TV to kind of get that real aesthetic. Because this film really does play with that whole like 90s aesthetic of everyone kind of just like crowding around the TV for appointment television. The idea that in the 90s you couldn't like record TV necessarily, so you had to like watch it when it was scheduled to air. If not, you had to wait for reruns, and then people would like get discs and burn the episodes to discs to then be able to rewatch it. We didn't have Netflix, we didn't have a lot of DVD and Blu-ray. Like this was a very niche concept, the idea of like recording these shows and having these archives of all these different episodes with the Sharpie marker on the disc. And this film really plays into that aesthetic. And I think that's the first and foremost thing that I think people can latch onto, even if you don't necessarily think it's scary, even if you don't necessarily relate to the themes of it all, you can relate to this very inciting premise, which is these two friends who kind of bond over their love for this television show, The Pink Opaque, which is a fictionalized television show, but actually it is modeled kind of after Buffy the Vampire Slayer a little bit. If you are a Buffy fan like I am a new Buffy fan, but I am a Buffy fan. They use even the same font in this show that they use for like the starring. It's the same font you would see where it says like starring Sarah Michelle Gellar. You would see that similar font in the show. So it's clearly an homage to that, but an homage to shows like that, these young adult shows that have these fantastical elements. And it's about these two characters, these two friends who kind of come together through this love of the show. And then one day, one of the friends disappears. And that's really all I'll tell you, because I think this is a film you really have to watch and just enjoy the ride for. Again, it's not necessarily one of those films that's about its story as much as it is about the themes and the experience that the main character is having. But what it overall has to say in the grand scheme of things is just this really interesting connection that people have with their TVs and with the media they love. And I saw a lot of myself in this film, especially in this respect, because I was someone who grew up with movies and TV. I didn't like going outside, play sports. I love playing catch with my dad. I love that. But I was not the guy signing up to go on these like outdoor adventures, hiking in the woods. That was very much my brother's thing. I was much more the kid who would like to stay inside, play with my action figures, and watch, Disney movies, or watch, movies in general, or TV. And that was like me as a kid. That was my awkwardness, my kind of loner status there. I wanted to be the kid inside, even on a beautiful sunny day, watching TV. And I think that is what this film speaks to so much, that I just saw so much of myself in it. Even if I can't relate to the queerness element of the film, I could definitely relate to that aspect of it. But then the film goes the extra mile, and this is where all the queerness creeps in that I don't think a lot of people are necessarily all finding on that first watch, because it is not stated. But I think because it's not stated, it is actually much more digestible. It doesn't feel as preachy in the way that some other films do. But when you're looking for the queerness and the transness in the film, it's very overt. The first shot of the film, one of the first shots, is this kid walking under this giant like parachute that you would have in like gym class, where you'd all sit underneath, and it's this beautiful parachute, but all the colors, it's like kind of resembling the transgender flag. So again, it's very, very obvious. It's just not stated in the script. It's not like verbally spoken by the characters. So it's one of those things where if you're watching it visually, you can pick up those cues, and the themes themselves are really, really tied to identity, but it's never really overtly said that it is a trans film. But I think that's what's so magical about it too, is that it can relate to more people because it's not trying to confine itself to a one singular thing. It kind of takes on a grander meaning of identity, and the fact that these characters can find themselves, they can escape into this other reality. And at large, that's kind of a really interesting commentary on the trans experience. The idea that you are existing in this body, but you really do identify with something else, something that's more inner in your core that you are trying to come to terms with. And there's a lot of stuff in this film that deals with gender dysmorphia in that way, the fact that you don't feel like you belong in the body, and it's a physical pain, especially toward the end of the film. There's a lot of that stuff where a character doesn't necessarily feel comfortable in their own skin, and you start to see how that essentially leads to a lot of the horror of the thing, because this is a horror essentially too. There has to be moments of fear, and I think a lot of the fear comes with this fear of identity, and this fear of necessarily not necessarily wanting to be something different, but being something and being presented and feeling like you're stuck in something you don't want to be stuck in. It's essentially like your body is a cage and you're trying to get out of it. And that's something that I, like I said, can't relate to in a very overt way. But I have a lot of friends who are of the trans community, of the queer community, LGBTQ plus community, and they have spoken about how successful it is in portraying that idea of feeling stuck, feeling like you cannot be your true self, and feeling like you're walking around in someone else's shoes and someone else's clothes. And how the media we watch and the television we consume and the film we consume can sometimes to the outsiders seem like it's rotting our brains. It's, a distraction. They should be outside playing ball. They should be outside going to the pool with their friends. They shouldn't be inside watching TV all day. TV is evil and rotting you in the brain. But really, what TV can be, or media can be, or film can be, or film criticism can be, you watching this YouTube video right now, what it can be for you is an escape. And I think that is something that is universal. It's not just confined to the trans experience, but it's that idea of finding your own identity in the things you love. Even if you're not into film and TV and you're into like athletics and sports, like what does watching the Olympics do for you? Are you engrossed in that world, in that sport? And does that make you feel like you come alive? And I think that's what this film is. It's about these characters kind of coming to terms with their own identity through the media they love and finding this connection and realizing that there's a part of themselves that they have yet to discover. And also the major thing, that there is still time. There is always time to find those discoveries, that there is a process for everyone and it takes a different amount of time per person. And I love what this film has to illustrate in that sense. Now, as for the horror, again, it is scary. There are scary images. There is definitely a lot of really freaky stuff going on here. And I think that's where this film is elevated. It's not just this really interesting story about identity and finding one's own identity through the media they consume, but Jane Schoenbrunn, who I haven't seen their previous work, We're All Going to the World's Fair, and I really need to because I love this work of theirs. But they really illustrate this really haunted kind of atmosphere. All the images, it is set in this suburban, atmosphere, but there's still something slightly off with everything. There's like these kind of neon pops of color. There's a little bit of extra darkness where you wouldn't necessarily conventionally see darkness. There are some very, distant images and very unique images. I just talked about Longlegs on Monday, a film that I liked but didn't love, and I felt like what it lacked were these really polarizing images, whereas I feel like I Saw the TV Glow has those really haunting images and has those very distinct images, even the ones that aren't haunting. For example, like I said, the kid with the parachute with the trans flag, essentially, another image toward the end with the character wearing a dress, like what that does to inform the character. I think even though those are not horrific necessarily images, I think they are definitely images that are memorable and that really kind of could be seen if we look through like the lexicon of film history as like some of the greatest images portraying this specific genre, the specific topic. And like I said, kind of harkening back to what I started this review with, talking about what is the best versus what is your favorite, all this stuff. And now the more I talk about, the more I realize this might also be my favorite movie of the year. But I think when we think of the most iconic films, I can't think of many films that portray this specific experience as accurately and as effectively as this does, and as universally. As someone who is kind of an outsider looking in, I felt like I could see through the eyes of this character. I felt like I was with these characters the 100% of the way through because I had that kind of relation to the media aspect of it. But I also felt like the film really illustrated, and Jane, the director, really illustrated perfectly well how that feeling of trappedness feels on the outside, and really using these kind of more horrific, more fantasized images to kind of emphasize that. I just think it's a really successful film in what it's trying to say, with, again, not being too preachy, not necessarily spelling out for you, well, this is a story about this. Instead, it's more of, this other kind of narrative that the other kind of subtext kind of submerges the more and more you watch it, and the more and more you think about it, and the more you let the kind of horror of it kind of fester on your mind, because it also is, for some people, a very traumatic experience dealing with this kind of unknowingness of like, what is going on with my body? Why don't I feel right? What do I want to be? I feel trapped. This idea of trapped, it doesn't necessarily have to be claustrophobia in the sense of like the Ryan Reynolds film Buried, where he's literally in a coffin under the ground. But for some characters, it feels like that in your everyday life, walking around, socializing, being at birthday parties, what that idea feels like when you feel like you're in this, straitjacket trying to get out. And I feel like that's what this film does so well, and the horror really aids that. Now, as for the filmmaking, as I said, Jane Schoenbrunn has created just such a distinct visual atmosphere here, and I love the sound design. I love how you hear like the static of the TV in almost every scene. It's kind of like Dunkirk with the ticking clock. Like, there's always that reminder of that static, that TV, because the TV glowing is essentially that freedom of expression. That's what that stands for. And so you have this like kind of festering kind of sizzle of the TV, of the static. And as each scene goes on, it just kind of lingers more and more on the brain to where at the end it can finally like burst out essentially. And there's actually a great image that really illustrates that. The music as well is really well incorporated. I was actually reading that Jane Schoenbrunn wanted to kind of pay homage to this kind of coming of age experience by going back to the traditional idea of like these playlists of these 90s era songs. So they literally commissioned like a 15 song original song soundtrack. There's a song with Phoebe Bridgers in the middle that will just like rip your heart out and have you sobbing in the theater, or if you watch it at home. Again, I was so locked in this movie when I was watching it in the theater, and everyone in my theater was locked in. And that's the most magical type of movie for me. Is, if there's someone on their phone or there's someone talking, it means that the movie's not gripping everyone, because clearly someone is more preoccupied with texting or looking at their watch or their Apple Watch, which is even worse because every time they raise their arm, it glows and it distracts. But here, every single person in the audience was glued to the screen, was just entranced by it, because that is kind of what this movie's about. It's about this media kind of consuming you and embracing you into this world. And I felt like that's what was happening. All the audience was just glued to the screen, fixated by it, where the credits rolled and not a single person in my theater moved. We just kind of sat there, quite literally emotionally moved by what was going on. And we just sat there just like in awe of what was going on. And I think that's just the most exciting cinema, in my opinion. So watching it back home, I was worried it wouldn't have that same impact because, it never does. Watching it in a theater versus watching it at home, or it rarely does, I should say. Some people might prefer it the other way around, but I think this did a really good job of holding up in a smaller, screen atmosphere, because, it harkens back to those days of sitting in front of the TV, on the couch, on the floor with your popcorn, watching a late night television show that you might not be allowed to watch. So you have to go to your friend's house to watch it. All those relatable experiences you can find in this film, but it is also scary because it creates those really haunting images. But ultimately, what it has to say about that haunted imagery and showing that there is a way to break free of the confines of our own bodies, our own genders, our own identities, there is still time to find yourself. And I think that's what's so beautiful, is in the midst of the horror, there is a green light, or in the sense, a pink light, a glow, if you will, of the TV to reach to strive toward. And I just think for the trans community, but just the queer community at large, allies as well, like myself, I think you can just find so much to appreciate in what this does for that community. And if you are just taking it at face value, it's still just a really engaging, really scary horror flick. And I think the problem is maybe at the end you might be a little puzzled, like, wait, that's how it ended? But I think there's something to be said about how it ends that relates to this trans experience, that I think if you rewatched it looking in that lens of that queerness and identity angle, I think it'll be a more satisfying ending. It was for me on rewatch. Even watching the ending, I understood it more, I related to it more. I think it really packed that punch that I really wanted it to, that it did in the theater, but I did think it hit even stronger now, knowing what this overall message was trying to convey. I just love it. I love it so much. I think it's one of those films that I will be raving about to the end of the year. It's going to get Pickle Awards. It's going to hopefully get some other awards in other places. Maybe it's not a big enough film or a mainstream enough film to get like Oscars, but like I hope it makes its rounds in some of the indie festivals, Gotham Awards, whatever else it could get. I hope it gets in. I hope the original music is recognized, because fitting that certain aesthetic and certain time period with the music is just so impressive. And all these stars coming to bat, and make those musical, beautiful compositions come to life. I think the performances are great. I haven't even talked about them, but Justice Smith and Bridget Lundy Payne are just so good. They bring this kind of awkwardness and quirkiness to the roles that are really, really welcoming, but also a little alienating. But that's the whole point, is they're supposed to be a little alienated from the outside world. They're supposed to be these unique individuals, so I really like that about it. We also see Daniel Deadwyler in a great supporting role. Fred Durst is in this thing. We even have Amber Benson, Tara herself from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, plays a role in this movie. And again, I think this is a really great homage for people who grew up with shows like Buffy, where that could be their escape, that could be their key into finding their own identity. And I think Tara as a character in that show was really big for that type of community and experience. And I think it's cool that she gets to kind of come full circle and have her fitting ending, even though her character is really not in it a ton. And I expected her to have a bigger role when I heard she was in it, and I heard what the film was about. I was like, oh, it's a film about queerness and television shows from the 90s. Oh, of course she's going to have a big role to play. And she is kind of just an extended cameo, but it is great to see her in this, because Tara and Willow, their story was very much what the pink opaque was for these characters and their queerness was to so many people who watched Buffy. So I just think if you're a Buffy fan, if you're a fan of TV and media, and you were kind of that outsider like me who would stay inside on a sunny day just to watch TV, even if all the kids were playing outside, and you might have gotten picked on for it, but your parents accepted you still for it. Even if your parents didn't accept you for it, this can kind of validate your experience, hopefully. Or if you are a member of the trans community and you are relating to it from that angle, or if you just like horror, I think this can tick all the boxes, but it's not going to tick every box. And there's going to be some people who feel alienated. So that is your blanket warning. But I really do hope everyone gives this one a chance because it is one of my favorites. And it is probably the best, in my opinion, film to come out of this year. And maybe, we'll see, maybe the best horror film to come out of this decade alone. So there we go. There are my thoughts on I Saw the TV Glow. If you're going to check it out, if you have checked it out, let me know in the comments below what you thought of them. I'm recording this pretty late at night after watching it, so I had to get some sleep. But Friday, I'm going to be giving you a double feature for you, a Shyamalan double feature where I'll be talking about Trap, the newest M. Night Shyamalan film, and his daughter's film, The Watchers. So that'll be a fun little double feature for you. That'll be on Friday. I'll be talking about those films. Otherwise, stay tuned. The rest of the month of August, I'm going to be giving you a new review for a summer movie that I haven't reviewed yet on the channel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, culminating on the last day of the month with a top 10 movies of the summer 2024. I got to get some sleep. I really, really want to watch this movie again, but I should get to sleep. It's like 4 a.m. when I'm recording this. But thank you for watching, and subscribe to this channel, like this channel, comment, do all that stuff. And please be kind. This is a film that is very divisive, and someone shouldn't have their experiences invalidated if they loved it or if they hated it. But please just be respectful, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to share our love of movies. And if you didn't love this movie, but you love another movie that is similar, prop that one up too. Why not? But thank you for watching. Check this movie out, please. I wish I could buy every single one of y'all a copy who's listening, but I really, I love it so much. Go support indie cinema. Go support queer cinema. Go support horror cinema. It's some of the most interesting cinema we're getting right now. All you losers at Sundance who saw this early, I'm so jealous of you. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.